So, brothers, as I've said before, I'm pleased to have brother and Dr. Ovidiu Galescu on the Zoom call tonight. It is great to have his presence here, and for those that need a little bit of a history on my relationship, on Past Master Banks and Past Master Blades' relationship with Dr. Galescu, he actually joined and was raised in St. James with us together. So. Dr. Galescu, I'd like to pass it over to you for your presentation, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation at the end of the evening, okay?
So let me share my screen, and we'll take it from there. Okay, quick introduction on myself. I actually worked and finished my residency at Downstate, right there in the heart of Brooklyn. That's how I came to know the lodge and get raised in the lodge. And it has been a privilege to be part of this family for years now. I moved in and I did my fellowship training at the National Institutes of Health. And I'm currently a medical officer with the Food and Drug Administration. That being said, I have to put a couple of disclaimers for this presentation. I have had no direct involvement in COVID-19 therapeutics, either the development side or the regulation side. All the information that I'm going to present to you is official and readily available from the FDA.gov website. None of it is my personal opinion or bias. And obviously, being an officer of the government, I have no financial stake in any of the therapeutics we're going to talk about today. COVID has been terrible for all of us, and it's even hard for me to go into the details of how bad this has impacted everyone. However, just a couple of things about the disease itself. It's an infectious disease caused by a virus that's a new mutation of a known virus. It appeared late in 2019 in Hunan, China. The predominant way it manifests itself is by respiratory illness, but it can also affect other organs. A lot of people with COVID have reported a massive range of symptoms, from very mild, asymptomatic, to very severe illness, and as you know, a lot of fatalities. Symptoms usually appear between 2 to 14 days after exposure, and usually are fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, muscle or body aches. So the common manifestations of flu-like symptoms. However, the range of these manifestations can go from very mild, like I said before, to extreme cases. From a therapy point of view, as of today, we have 2 vaccine solutions approved in the United States. One was approved in December 11, which is the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. This one is approved for individuals 16 years of age and above. It is a intramuscular injection. It's given in 2 separate doses, 3 weeks apart. And I think you have heard about the controversy or the discussion about the fact that it is a novel approach to vaccines, being a mRNA vaccine. That means traditional vaccines, just to put it in context, are the original virus, but dumbed down. So it's live attenuated, which means you take the original strain of the virus, you numb it down, and then that form gets inoculated. For this particular type of new vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, they only take a snippet of viral RNA, which is specific to the S antigen, which is just a part of the coronavirus itself. So that makes it more targeted, but at the same time, less specific. And we'll get into some of the discussion about the new strains. Like I said before, who should get it? Anybody that's 16 years of age or older. The safety has been evaluated in thousands of people all over the world. Before, we are talking about just before the application was submitted to the Food and Drug Administration. So about 40,000 patients were split into two groups, and 20,000 received vaccine, 20,000 received placebo. And out of this 40K cohort, they followed everybody for about 2 months to see what the adverse events were. Since then, obviously, we have millions of people already vaccinated. So every day that the vaccine is out there in circulation, we're gathering more and more data. But there hasn't been any spectacular changes from the profile that the sponsor first submitted to us. So the most common adverse events are still the injection site reactions, and then a day or two after the vaccine, followed by tiredness and headaches and muscle pain. Basically, all of the effects that you would have if you would get a mild form of the disease. There have been some rare reactions like lymph node swelling, especially in the armpits, and some severe allergic reactions that have been reported after Pfizer Covid vaccine was approved. These usually, the severe allergic reaction usually happen shortly after the administration, and that's why there are precautions in place where people are being vaccinated and then they have to stay under medical supervision for at least 15, 20, 30 minutes, depending on the clinic that administers the vaccination. Because the severe allergic reactions are basically an anaphylactic type reaction that will happen immediately after the administration. So if it's caught in that early stage, it can be addressed. So what are the benefits? And this is a graph that a table that I got straight from the approval. And what I want you guys, it's a lot of information, I know, but just briefly, and it's something that anybody can understand. In the Pfizer vaccine group, only 8 subjects out of 18,000 got the disease after receiving the vaccine, as opposed to 162 in the placebo group. So that's a 95%. So when you compare the two, it's a 95% vaccine efficacy. And the efficacy is maintained even when you break down the population by age. So even in the older age, 65 and above, it's still around 95% efficacy. Again, this is data on short-term surveillance because there was a need to expedite the marketing of this therapy. The other vaccine that is currently approved is the Moderna Vaccine. It was approved on December 18, 2020. And the only difference is it's for 18 and above, so it doesn't catch that 16 to 18 age range. Again, it's an intramuscular injection of 2 doses, 1 month apart, as opposed to 3 weeks apart in the Pfizer one. It is very similar. It's still an mRNA against the S antigen. So then, the differences are chemistry and formulation and mode of supply and storage. Who should get it? Again, anybody who's approved for. The safety was generated in 15,000 patients. The adverse events were reported in about 1%, serious adverse events, in about 1% of participants. There was one case of Bell's palsy. That's a neurological adverse event with hemifacial paralysis. It is relatively common and has been documented with other vaccines and with the virus itself. Overall safety, very similar. The main adverse events are the pain at the injection site, followed 24 to 48 hours later by fatigue, headache, muscle pains, joint pains. So pretty much a mild case of the disease for 24 to 48 hours. Like I said, we are gathering data every day because of the mass vaccinations. There hasn't been any substantial addition to this list that I showed you. In terms of benefits, again, it's 94% efficient. You can see the numbers. 11 cases out of 15 that got the active vaccine ended up having the disease versus 185 having the disease. Of note, none of the subjects that received vaccine had severe COVID-related disease. And I think that's a very important point. And right now, I'm not talking as the regulator, I'm talking as the clinician. For me, that's one of the biggest pluses for these vaccines. Even if subjects do get the disease, the rate of what we believe so far is that the rate of serious disease, the rate of need for hospitalization, the rate of need for intubation, ICU stay, that should dramatically go down. Because apart from the fact that the virus is extremely taxing on our medical system, a lot of the problems that we see is the fact that all of these severe cases overwhelm the medical system. And I am pretty sure, there's obviously no statistics that I can cite, but I'm pretty sure that there are cases where patients could have had care, but that care wasn't available because the system was overwhelmed. So I am a strong advocate for these vaccines. I do not subscribe to any cockamamie theories that are circulating out there. I think they are beyond ridiculous, and as a scientist, I don't even want to discuss them. If you are considering getting the vaccine, and you should, please let your provider know if you've had any allergies, fevers, any blood disorders. If you are immunocompromised, can be recovering after a bad illness on medication that reduces your immunity. If you have HIV or hepatitis or any other illness or cancer, or have had treatment for cancer, any illness that is going to affect your immune system, you should make the physician aware. Pregnant women or women planning to become pregnant should also advise their physicians. We don't really know, I have a slide that addresses it, we don't really know the cross-reactivity of the vaccine. So if you've received another vaccine, you should probably tell your doctor. And then the risks cumulative are the same that we discussed before. Very rare are the allergic reactions and anaphylaxis. Other than that, it's just the injection site reactions followed by a mild flu-like illness. Like I said, there's no data available on the interchangeability of the two vaccines available. So if you've gotten one, the second dose has to be with the same one, because we just don't know how they would react or how they would protect you. So what's the FDA's role in the fight against COVID-19? So one big thing that we are trying to educate people on, the FDA is not involved in the COVID vaccine distribution or appointments. In fact, the federal government, as of yet, has had very little involvement in the vaccine distribution. It's all done through local authorities. The FDA as an agency within the U.S. Department protects public health by assuring the safety, effectiveness, and security of human and veterinary drugs, vaccine, and other biological products for human use and medical devices. And the agency is also responsible for the safety and security of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, dietary supplements, products that give off electronic radiation, and for regulating tobacco products. So apart from these vaccines, we have been regulating a tremendous number of additional applications, from drugs to ways of detecting and testing for COVID to personal protective equipment to hand sanitizers, and making sure that the supply of all of these is adequate. So it's been a tremendous strain on the entire organization, and I am actually very proud to be part and to have been here under these times. A little update on what's going on at the FDA right now. So of big interest is the monitoring and identifying of these new variants that keep popping up, the UK version, the South African version. And we are assessing the impact of the new strains on the already authorized products. The FDA is also developing constant guidance for diagnostic therapeutics and vaccines developer to help the ongoing medical product development, and to make sure that the new strains are covered both by the detection system and by the therapy aspect. For the virus targeting monoclonal antibodies, we are considering approaches to help expedite drug development, including regulatory flexibilities. In the history of drug development and regulation, there is no precedent for the turnaround that has been done with these vaccines. It is a historical moment in FDA regulation. We've literally put an army of people at work for the purpose of approving these drugs. This section addresses upcoming news on this front. I think that one that you'd be more interested is that on February 26th, there's going to be a advisory committee, which is a big FDA meeting in which there's going to be discussion of authorizing emergency use authorization for the third vaccine from Janssen Biotech. So that's good news if everything turns out to be good with that application. And other work that's been going on, and you've probably heard about Convalescent Plasma. It's recently come to the FDA's attention that though it appeared to be initially efficient, it is apparent that patients who have impaired immunity will not produce an adequate response. Therefore, the convalescent plasma that is used needs to have a very high titer of antibodies in order to be efficient. So low levels of antibodies have been detected. Low levels of antibodies have been detected in some of these plasma batches, which, when administered to subjects, would not have the desired therapeutical effect. In fact, you would just expose the patient to the adverse event profile. Other issues, remdesivir is a drug that's been used and tried. It is still used off-label and in the fight against COVID, but it's an antiviral drug with some potential. However, we've discovered recently that some pharmacies that produce this drug, so compounding pharmacies, may not, in fact, provide the quality of product necessary to deliver results. So there was a warning for these compounding remdesivir products. So that's why there was a communication recommending providers to use the approved drug rather than the one that's made ad hoc by pharmacies. As of today, we have explored and authorized 322 types of tests and collection devices, and have authorized them for use in the detection and diagnostics of COVID. 239 are molecular tests and sample collection device antibody tests, and 14 are antigen-based tests. So 69 are antibody tests and 14 are antigen tests. There are 35 molecular authorizations that can be used with home collected samples. So 35 ways of getting a vial that you use at home and then mail in. And there's one molecular prescription at home test and one antigen prescription at home test, and even an over-the-counter at home antigen test. So all of these are regulated by the FDA and are currently in circulation. So I was asked to touch a bit on COVID and minority disparities. And as we know, apart from the classical access to medication, access to healthcare, which impacts poor and minorities more than any other category, there has been a historic lack of trust in the African American and Latino communities regarding vaccination programs. What I can tell you is that the FDA has had several communications, and I've included some of the links for anybody that's interested. There was a talk with minority community leaders held by the FDA late last year. There was a virtual meeting with racial and ethnic minorities, community members about FDA COVID-19 vaccine work, and that has a full hour conference, videotaped, very good conference for those that are interested. And because we are aware at an agency level of these discrepancies, there has been a guidance published late last year to reflect the agency's thinking on steps to broaden eligibility criteria and clinical trials through inclusive trial practices, trial design, and methodological approaches. Because not only have we've seen a lack of trust and a lack of access in the minority communities after the approval, but we also see a lack of inclusion during the development part. So that's to say, if I am receiving as a regulator a massive application that is not representing the US population, so that is not adequately included Hispanics, African Americans, that has not included enough elderly, enough women. So then the problem is that when we approve drugs, we can include unwilling biases based on the data that we receive. Therefore, we have made it a mandate and a guidance to the developers to study the drugs in an all-inclusive fashion and to try to include these minorities, to have them represented at the moment when the drug is being developed. Therefore, when we actually end up approving a drug, it is relevant for those minorities and for those populations. So historically speaking, why I've tried to understand this. You guys know I am an American by adoption, right? So I came to the United States in 2009. I am seeing this almost as a bystander, so I'm trying at every point to educate myself, which I think we should all do. And it was mind-boggling to see that there is a difference in perception in minority groups. And according to the Pew Research Center, about only 43% of African Americans stated that they would get the vaccine for COVID-19 if it was available to them. That's by far the lowest of any racial group they surveyed. So what are the roots of this skepticism? And I'm no way a authority in this matter, but the award-winning writer and ethicist Harriet Washington has a NPR article and interview where she talks about the historical basis for this reticence, which is very interesting, and I urge you to listen to it. Historically, there has been unethical practices in research in both medication and medical procedures that has been performed in a lot of underserved communities, on blacks, on prisoners, on prostitutes. So there have been a lot of populations that have been targeted by so-called research and unwillingly exposed to very unethical practices, all in the name of science. So that has led to ingrained reticence when it comes to both participating in these studies and later on receiving the product, which is also, we're getting in a chicken and the egg kind of scenario, because if you are not represented at the trial level, then it is actually understandable to be skeptical of the final product, because that final product and the effect of the final product may not, in fact, represent your particular group. And I think that that's the loss for me. So I am looking forward to hear any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate that very much, man. Thank you. Brothers, we have just received a wealth of knowledge from a very valuable source, and once again, I'm sorry I didn't give him the introduction that he deserves, and that is Dr. Ovidiu Galescu, the medical officer for the Food and Drug Administration. This is an incredible resource of information. It is an incredible resource of knowledge as he talks about the studies and the history of the COVID-19 vaccines. Listen, for us in the minority community, we face a tremendous challenge of trust regarding these vaccines. But with the double-edged sword, we're also facing a tremendous amount of life lost due to this virus as well. So, brothers, I will ask you to please unmute your lines here. Josh, we can unmute if we need to here. But any questions or comments for Dr. Galescu before we go into a little other, different path of some history that I wanted to chat with him about as well while we have him on here. But any questions or comments for Dr. Galescu here, for Brother Ovidiu Galescu?
Yeah, I have one. When it comes to the vaccine, have there been any data regarding how long the vaccine lasts?
So that's an excellent question. The very short answer would be no, but it's not realistic. I think that it's sort of like a lazy answer. So why no? Just because from the moment when the first patient was enrolled in the trials to the moment when the subject, when the vaccine was approved, it was a very short time. And like I said, it's basically made regulatory history regarding the speed with which we were forced by the reality of this disease to approve these drugs. However, there is data in what's called the pharmacokinetics of the drug and the response. So what a lot of these trials and a lot of medicine is pure math, believe it or not. Yes, we all hear about the fact that it's art, but it's also math. So if you mount this level of response to the vaccine, and then I check the way the response drops over time, then I can do a mathematical predictive model to see how long you will be protected. It is ultimately a theoretical model, obviously, just because we don't have the hardcore data, but this theoretical model has the coverage of vaccination to between 9 months to a year at the most conservative points. So I do believe that it is similar to the flu vaccines, and it probably will end up being a annual vaccine. There has been discussion about the need for a biannual, so every 6 months. I haven't seen any literature or evidence to suggest that, but we are all learning. What I can tell you is that the level of antibodies that is being generated through vaccination has actually been higher than the levels of antibodies that you get by having the actual disease. So that's encouraging for a vaccine profile. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
It does. Thank you, Ovi. That's pretty sharp as well. Question for you that I have. So, we talk about the disparity of the minority community and the amount of individuals taking the vaccine overall. Is there any type of projection or study by the FDA that believes will achieve by a specific time the acceptance of the vaccine by individuals, as well as reaching a level of herd immunity to resume our natural life? Do we have a timeline based on the current vaccinations and the acceptance of the vaccinations?
I think that I'm not going to be able to answer that question from an FDA perspective, because FDA just doesn't do that kind of research. It would fall more under the CDC prerogative. Maybe the NIH would have some inkling of that. But from an epidemiological, purely scientific point of view, you need to achieve at least 80% either vaccination, 80% of any given population vaccination, or immunity through disease. We honestly don't want any more immunity through the disease, considering how rough it's been already. But you need to have basically immunity in about 80% of the population to have this so-called herd immunity. You've seen, at this point, you guys know as much as I do about the vaccination rates. Honestly, they are extremely variable because they're locally modulated, and each county of each state does their own thing. So who knows when we'll achieve it. I am optimistic that there are more and more proactive measures to have widespread vaccination programs. So I am hoping that we will achieve a substantial volume of vaccination in 2021, but I wouldn't be able to give you a prediction.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that very much. Brothers, any other questions for Dr. Galescu here?
I have a question. Doctor, I'm concerned about the mutation rate that we have at this time with the vaccine, with the COVID itself mutating. Now, what is causing it to mutate? Is there something that is artificial that's being induced into it, or an environmental situation that's creating a mutation of it, that we are changing the dynamics of the COVID itself, the disease itself, the virus?
Excellent question. So just a little bit about this type of viruses. The coronavirus family is, like, part of the coronavirus family is the common cold. You know the saying about finding a cure for common cold, which is sort of, we considered an impossibility. And why is that? Is because this family of viruses, and it's not just this family, viruses in general do this, but this particular family is known for rapid mutations. So not necessarily that we are doing something to cause the mutations, but the more it spreads, the more it is prevalent, the more it adapts. And it is going to adapt to all sorts of factors, including environmental factors. So that's a very good point. And it is going to cause mutations. And that's why you get a yearly vaccine for the flu, because the flu also mutates every year. Every year, the vaccine that you get is a different vaccine. It's a different flu strain that you're getting every year because it mutates from year to year. But scientists right now can predict those mutations for the flu, not so much for coronavirus. Now, one important aspect, I think, of the therapies that are being developed, of the vaccines that are being developed, is the fact that they try to target a specific point, this S compound in the coronavirus capsule, that seems to be common for all of these mutations. That being said, because these mutations are rather new, we don't know the efficacy of the vaccine for them. We just don't have the data. Should it, in theory, still work? Yes, probably. Anything is better than getting the disease, for sure. Now, the rates at which the vaccines would protect one from the new mutations, it's just unclear at this point because we don't have enough data. These new strains, unfortunately, seem more aggressive, which obviously is a downer for everyone. So even if you end up getting vaccinated, as a physician, I would recommend continuing a modicum of caution when it comes to exposure. Masks do save lives. Personal hygiene and especially sanitizing do save lives. Not exposing yourselves to large crowds, definitely a big factor. I don't think that it's the end of this story, and I do think that there are more and more of these mutations and variations that will pop up, and that has to do with the fact that the virus is becoming so prevalent. So it's like in any population, even in the human race, the more of us we are, the more variability pops up. So it's kind of like the same with the virus. The more of it being around and jumping from one host to the other, the higher the chances that it will adapt and that it will become more virulent or more aggressive. So the one thing that we can do to impact the rate of mutation is the virus is to actually impact the rate of transmission. So if the virus doesn't jump from host to host and doesn't wildly replicate, chances are it's not going to mutate. It doesn't mutate if it doesn't spread.
Beautiful. Great answer.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brothers, any other questions for Dr. Galescu here? Any questions that you have? There are no bad questions, I promise. This is a wealth of information and important to our health that you all understand. If you have any questions that you may want to ask.
I have a quick question.
Sure, Pastor.
Brother Galescu, excellent presentation. Thank you. The last that I read was that the injection was still under emergency use authorization. Has that changed?
No, as of now, all of the approved therapeutics are under emergency authorization. Let me just give you a little bit of context on what that means. Any regular application that comes to the FDA has a timeline for our turnaround of 10 months. This is an agreement, a bilateral agreement between the FDA and the drug developers. So they give us the data, we take 10 months to thoroughly evaluate that data to give them a reply. There are obviously situations in which that turnaround is faster. There's a program that limits that turnaround to 6 months. That's considered an accelerated approval. For this turnaround that has been done in 2 months or less, depending on the product, these are extraordinary conditions. Therefore, these drugs will continue to be under emergency authorization until the FDA has adequate data coming from post-marketing situation, unfortunately, but it is what we're dealing with, to grant a full authorization. The emergency authorization gives the FDA some wiggling room where adjustments can be made. And I think you've all seen the whole discussion with the number of doses per vial that's available. That came in at, I think it was 5 doses per vial for the Pfizer drug, and then it got to 7 doses. So this emergency authorization lets us do those modifications in real time as the drug is being administered. Does it come with risks? Yes, it does. But honestly, that's the entire job here at the FDA. It's risk management and risk versus benefit. The benefit of having a healthy, vaccinated population that even if they get exposure to COVID-19 do not end up severely ill in the hospital far outweighs any perceived risks that we have evaluated so far.
That was something else I was going to ask you to speak about, the benefit risk ratio, and thank you for that.
Honestly, the benefit risk ratio, I'm not even going to address it from an FDA point of view. I'm just going to address it from a, basic physician point of view. It's one kills you, one doesn't. I don't know how to put it differently. It's honestly, even the reactions that have been documented so far, all I have to say towards that, and I have my limitations. I'm by trade a pediatrician and an endocrinologist, so I'm not an infectious disease specialist, but I've done trials and trial designs, and I've done research and science for almost a decade now. So what I can tell you is, if you're going to have adverse events from receiving the vaccine, just think how you would react to the actual virus.
Well,
so that's the perspective that I want to put in people's minds. Yes, the vaccine, like any medication, any over-the-counter medication that you take, any supplement, anything will come with a safety profile and with risks associated with it. But the downside is seeing what we see at a national and world level.
Now, me personally, I took the injection being an employee at Downstate as well. I made the decision to take the injection after speaking to one of the researchers in my department. And when she broke it down to me, I had more of an understanding of what this vaccination was and how it worked. And it took a lot of my question marks away, to the point where I said, okay, I'll take it. Like many others in the Black community, I had apprehensions and I wasn't going to take it. And once I got a little more educated on the vaccine, that's what prompted me to take it, and I had very, very minimal side effects, which is soreness in the injection area. I developed a little slight rash on my chest and stomach. That's it, nothing else. Both injections.
Yep. My wife and I are both physicians. Both have had the first dose here in Maryland. We've had absolutely no. My wife had, I think, a small local reaction. I had nothing, just some soreness at the site of injection, absolutely nothing else. Being in the medical community, I have dozens and dozens of friends and former colleagues that have had the vaccine. I think the only ones that I've heard having somewhat more pronounced reaction were the ones that had previous COVID exposure. So probably they already had circulating antibodies, therefore they reacted a little bit stronger to the vaccine. But even that was maybe a day of feeling, under the weather post the vaccinations. I have not heard of any serious adverse events except for those noted in literature. There are some cases from Europe with the Pfizer vaccine where very elderly people, 90 plus, have passed away after the vaccination. And it's hard to say, honestly. There were a lot of comorbidities in that population. So when you saw the warning, if you're immunocompromised, it's complicated.
Yeah.
I have another question to ask.
Absolutely.
In reference to the development of the vaccine, there had to be an incubation period in reference to the development. But because of the emergency, did they compromise the period of time for evacuation in order to be able to administer this vaccine? In other words, we have such an emergency that's needed. It seems as though they're producing at such a rapid rate that there seems like not to be enough time for this to incubate, if there's such thing as an incubation period.
No, excellent question, and I get your point. Yes, so drugs and biologicals generally are not up on the market so fast. Mm-hmm. However, so obviously there were corners cut, but where the corners were cut were at the time that the study population was followed. So so what I mean by that is once they've had the compound, once the compound was tested in preclinical situations, and there's no corners cut there because there cannot be corners cut in the preclinical part. For a million reasons that are very technical to explain, you just cannot do that in the preclinical part. There may be some studies that can be deferred and are being run at the same time, even in the preclinical world. But once you have a formulation and you go to the decision to put it in humans, that formulation, so the chemical part, the biochemical part, that needs to be flawless. Where the cut corners come in was the fact that the data that was submitted to us was of 2 months exposure. So they gave the vaccine, waited for 2 months, and had an interim analysis. Based on that interim analysis, the FDA decided to give the emergency authorization because of the situation that we are in at a global level. So yes, you are right that under normal circumstances, you would not see any drug on the market from the moment it starts clinical trials to approval within 2 months. That doesn't happen. A minimum duration for a trial of even lighter situations is a year. So even in more run-of-the-mill diseases, a minimum of a year of exposure to that drug is required. You can imagine that with thousands dying a day, nobody could afford to prolong these studies to a year. That's why it was opted to have the surveillance for the safety of these drugs and also efficacy actually done in the post-marketing session, which means we put it on the market, we start vaccinating people, and we keep a lookout for all the possible adverse events. And we also take into account the rates of infection to see if they maintain efficacy. We couldn't have waited a year to run a full-length study to do this. From that point of view, there is precedence in regulatory history, not at this level, but the example that I'm going to give you is for cancer medication. So the cancer therapy evolves very rapidly. So there are a lot of therapies that are proposed to the FDA under an emergency mandate. And the reason is the subject that's supposed to receive this life-saving medication will die. Therefore, we cannot take a year or 10 months to study that drug before approving it for that specific cancer type. So there, in oncology, there's a lot of these emergency applications and emergency authorizations, but they are very, very niche. So they target 1 to 10 patients with that particular type of cancer. And it's the same concept. We give it because the risk of not giving it is too high. The person will die. So therefore, we authorize it. And the same concept does apply to the vaccines, only you have to realize that we needed to transpose from our usual emergency authorizations of, cancer medications for a couple of patients to worldwide administration of this compound. So yes, it is unprecedented. We learn a lot from this experience, and we are constantly monitoring every piece of information that comes from the administration. I don't think that anybody could have afforded a lengthier development program. But I can assure you that the preclinical, so the, like you said, incubation part, it's not incubation per se because the methodology of production is different. So they don't have the actual live virus that they have to attenuate in order to obtain it. So it's a completely different methodology, but that is done by the books.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Galescu, thank you, my brother, very, very much for this tremendous wealth of knowledge that you've shared with us today. Brothers, if you have any other questions, what I'll ask us to do is actually maybe compile this and have another Q&A session where we might be able to share this with Dr. Galescu as well and have him back on again. We didn't get to touch on the personal aspect of joining Masonry and some other things, and I think we will on another evening, Dr. Galescu, but so proud to have been raised with you in this lodge, so appreciative of the work that you do on a daily basis, and so humble for you being here right now and taking the time out of your Saturday evening to share this moment with us. I think
always a pleasure. I miss you guys.
We miss you too, brother. We do definitely miss you too, man. St. James misses our doctor here. So thank you very much for attending here this evening. You're cool to hang out for the rest of the evening if you'd like to as well. And brothers, thank you so much for the patience on this call, for listening to the information, for the questions. And like I said before, any other additional questions, we will be sure, I believe, to have a second session here with Dr. Galescu and kind of dive in a little bit deeper on some of these other things as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a parting piece of advice. We cannot fix the social issues, the disparity issues, the racial issues anywhere. Not talking about just the United States, talking about the world. If we are not involved, be involved in the science, be involved in the community, be involved in spreading knowledge and spreading reason. Do not encourage crazy conspiracies because they are detrimental to your community. We are living in very taxing times. And ultimately, all I can tell you is believe in science. If you don't believe in, any other thing, in any other state-run institution, if you have your doubts based on the history that these communities have lived through, and it's understandable, that's fine, but do believe in the science.
Thank you, Dr. Galescu. I appreciate that so much. And thank you, brother Ovidiu from St. James Lodge, number 114. We appreciate you very, very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Glad to see you, brothers.